things like halberds and spears, and they actually marched and demanded a right to vote. Bombs and what is it? Fires were also set on businesses during the women's suffrage movement. Not just in
how
Europe,
many
but
men
also
did
in the
women
United
kill
States.
for their rights in France?
Well, I don't know how that matters, because really, ultimately,
because
when
if
it
the men
comes
in France
to
said, no, fucking put your poles down, you stupid bitches, or else we're going to smack the shit out of you, they couldn't do anything, Richard.
well, not
Andrew Wilson completely owns vegan gains in a debate about feminism. Vegan gains clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, can't seem to grasp the concepts that Andrew Wilson puts forth. And Andrew Wilson, I think, does a good job of articulating his arguments, but why take my word for it? Watch for yourself and see how this debate goes down.
suffrage movement, but we see women have engaged in warfare. We have seen women support war efforts. And I also don't understand how that relates to voting. So I'd like Andrew to explain some of this, because there are certainly people who have no ability to fight, period, let alone fight for their rights. I mean, there's mentally disabled people, there's physically disabled people, and there's physically disabled people who are mentally disabled, who in no way can make arguments in support of the idea of their rights. They cannot physically fight for their rights, yet we grant them rights, and they also have a right to vote. So I'd like to hear some of this kind of explained and broken down by Andrew.
No, I'm pretty sure Andrew's going to do an excellent job of breaking this down. However, I've seen people argue against Andrew Wilson on this topic about, feminism and such, and about how men grant women rights because men are the most dominant. And these people, I don't know if they're acting like they don't understand, but to me, it's pretty easy to understand what Andrew's trying to say. But then they still don't understand, like, what? But wait a minute, what about this? What about physically disabled, mentally disabled, blah, blah, blah. So let's see what Andrew has to say.
And that is my opening statement.
Thank you, good sir. Riveting. Excellent setup for a glorious duel. Andrew, your response. You have 7 minutes.
Yeah, so let's kind of dive into this. First, you say that you believe a woman having a right to vote based on, you said something along the lines of, I don't understand how it is that a woman doesn't have the right to vote just because a man hasn't allowed her to have that right to vote, which to me seems kind of absurd, because you then went on to say, yes, it's true that men grant women rights. Now, I think you were trying to make the statement that you think society, right, which is everybody and nobody and anybody and somebody, grants rights to everybody. But this would actually be inaccurate. So the first thing that you said is society at large has granted the X factor's rights. So the X factor would be basically everybody that's not a dominant man, right? It'd be gays as a marginalized group, black as a marginalized group, things like this. But that's also not true. Men granted them rights. That was men who granted them rights, and men can take those rights away from those groups whenever they so choose. And they do all the time. They've done it all over the world. They've taken rights away from gays, and there's nothing gays can do about it. They take rights away from women. There's nothing women can do about it. They take rights away from people all the time as a dominant social group. You say that rights have to be granted. This is also not true, or at least it's only a half truth. Men can grant themselves rights. If they get enough of them together, they can decide that even if they're being oppressed, that they don't want to be oppressed anymore. They don't like that shit very much, and they can take up arms and grant themselves rights, and have done that historically many, many, many times. So no, men don't have to necessarily grant other men their rights. That's the point. Whereas they do have to grant it to women. They have to, because women can't do that and men can. The women's suffrage movement, which you brought up, that was not women fighting for their rights. That was women whining for their rights. There was no fight anywhere. Where was the fight? Where were these women taking up arms? Where were they bashing the men over the head? Where were they taking the men on? Where were they taking on the patriarchy with hands, feet, fist, and gun? Nowhere. They were just whining, and they were heavily supported by men's funding, or it never would have happened to begin with. So no, they've never fought for their rights ever. They've just whined. They don't fight. They can't fight. What are they going to do? They can't do anything. To men as a collective can simply put their foot down on women whenever they so choose, even as a small collective. Even if they're outnumbered 10-1, they can still do this. We've seen this in France, for instance, in World War II, where 2/3 of the population post-World War II was completely and totally devastated. You only had 1/3 or less. Some estimates as low as 19% of the population was men. That's how low the estimate in some cases could be because of how many died between World War I and World War II. So no, I disagree kind of heavily with all of your positions. Now, when it comes to kind of your main contention, which is voting in and of itself, I don't consider it to be necessarily evil or a moral good or a moral imperative of any kind. I think it's just one system of many systems, but still men are going to be the ones who create that system and grant that system to women. So that's my position on this.
Okay, so do you believe women should have a right to vote?
Real quick, before we get in the back and forth, just want to say a couple of things. Thank you for the opening statement, Andrew. Here in the Crucible, we do things a little bit differently. I, as the moderator, will not be getting involved. And just officially, for the FBI agent and agent of Mossad watching, I do not endorse anyone's perspective on here. I am merely moderating for the sake of discussion. We'll go for an hour and a half, back and forth, and then we'll take questions and super chats. I will not be reading the super chats until the Q&A. But until then, good luck, guys.
All right. Go ahead, man. What was your question?
Yeah, so do you believe women should have a right to vote or not?
If men grant it to them. I mean, I don't think that women I don't think that men ought to do horrible or evil things to women. I don't think that they ought to do that. But I also think that they're in a particularly unique situation due to the fact that they make society run, and they're the operators which make society run, where that's going to be uniquely their decision to make.
Okay, but the basis for whether or not you think women should have a right to vote is whether or not men decide to give them a right to vote.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so say if men had an interest in the political system to vote for, say, repealing women's rights.
Yeah.
You don't think women should have any sort of political power in a system where they can also vote and influence political change for their own benefit?
Well, it's more correct to say that they wouldn't. And it's not a matter of what I would ought. It's just a matter of they could not. So whether I would ought it to be true or not ought it to be true, what descriptively is true is that they can't. They can't stop men from taking away their rights. They just can't do it. They have
right, but you did say that you're against the idea of doing horrible things to women, right? So, like,
yeah, and men.
In theory, you'd be against something like spousal grape.
I mean, it depends on how that's defined, but I mean, in general, any type of grape I would be against. Yeah.
Well, like strangling somebody, forcing yourself upon them, you'd be against something like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I believe still to this day, there's a few states that don't actually recognize spousal rape. So, right. So women would be,
and so men, if they wanted to, could go into those states with guns, and they could say, "You're going to change this fucking law," right? but women can't. Vegan gains, they can't do that. That's the distinction. No, they can't.
They can't. So they can't.
No, they can't. Can you name a single time in history where they have? Go ahead.
Yeah, so the women's suffrage movement, in France in particular, women actually grabbed polearms. So not just pitchforks, but also they got things like halberds and spears, and they actually marched and demanded a right to vote. Bombs and what is it? Fires were also set on businesses during the women's suffrage movement.
How many men did women kill for their rights in France?
Well, I don't know how that matters, because really ultimately,
Because
when
if
it
the men
comes
in France
to-
said, no, fucking put your poles down, you stupid bitches, or else we're going to smack the shit out of you, they couldn't do anything, Richard.
well, not okay, so not every right that's fought for requires like extreme physical violence, like
Yeah, it
I mean like
does.
an
It
entire
always
world
requires
war. No, it
force.
doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. Well, how do you back up rights without force, Richard? Tell me.
Well, I'm saying not every right that has been granted has required a world war.
Well,
So you
first
don't
of all, I think, depending. I'm trying to figure out what you mean, but I think it has. I think every
No.
single right you have requires force. I can't think of a right that doesn't require force to be enforced. Can you?
Well, to be enforced, yes, but I'm saying to be granted, no.
Yeah, to be
So
granted,
so
because, and I'll tell you why that has to be true. Because if you grant a right to a person, what actually gives them the right if there's no force? So
okay,
how
well,
could they keep the right if there's no force allowing them to keep the right? In other words, if I say, no, wife, you don't have any fucking rights. She can call men and they can come arrest my ass using force. So force is the mechanism for rights.
so you have a right to free speech like the First Amendment. How many times have you seen police interactions where police officers violate First Amendment rights? So somebody's protesting, they say you can't have that sign here, they get arrested. Well, how does this play out? This plays out in court. I don't think there's ever been a situation where I don't know, like
How is this dude not understanding this? But you need force. Yes, it plays out in court. But how do you get the person to go to court? You use force. Once that guy is sentenced, how do you get them to go into the prison? You use force. They don't just go, okay, go to prison now, and then they just go on their own. No, if they don't go to the even if that is the case, if they don't do it, if they don't go to the prison on their own, then it requires force. It's not just like, okay, you go into prison now, and the guy's like, no, thank you, I don't feel like doing my sentence, and they're like, oh, all right, well, have a good day then. No, if the person doesn't comply, then force is used.
there's a shootout over whether or not somebody can hold a sign up.
There
Between like a cop and other cops.
Well, okay. Well, there has been, except I can give you a perfect distinction, which is the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. These are distinctions where people said, no, we're not going to, pay maybe your tax or your tariff, or we don't want this type of compelled speech, or we don't want to be oppressed in our speech in these ways. Various factors came into all sorts of small micro revolutions. In fact, another example that I can give you, I believe that it was called the Battle of Athens, which happened inside of America. This was an American city. And the police magistrate was so corrupt that men went home and got their guns and went back to town and literally overthrew the local magistrate and put in their own government. So in other words, when they felt oppressed, they could just go do something about it. I would like to see an example of that by women anywhere in history ever.
Okay, so I don't know of any again, aside from like women's suffrage where women did actually in fact take up arms, at least in Europe.
Well, they carried shit. That's not taking up arms. Taking up arms,
that's the same.
No,
That's
taking up
literally
arms
the
is
same.
you're like actually walking down the street and killing people. That's taking up arms against something.
Okay, well, in that example you just gave, were people shot and murdered?
Yeah. In fact, there was a massive shootout. They raided the National Guard armory and they had a battle all night.
Okay, in any case, like ultimately, if you have enough of a societal disruption to where the only way to resolve this is either by, again, granting rights or coming to, I don't know, some fight and literally having force decide whether or not rights will, like, who gets the rights they want. Women have done this. Like, again, women's suffrage. It's just that men decided it's not worth it to actually take up arms.
Yes, men decided. Men decided not to take up arms. Are you not listening to yourself?
women and fight. No, that's absolutely what happened.
Here's what happened. Most women were against the vote. Most women, let me say that again, were against the vote. Most of them. So you had anti-suffragettes, which aren't covered in history very often, but the anti-suffragette movement was much higher, and feminists used feminist propaganda, and they used the money of giant elite men in order to push through the agenda. And it still wasn't even popular after it passed. It still wasn't even popular after it passed for a long while. And you want to know what the reasoning is behind the anti-suffragettes, the women who were against the right to vote, is they said, we can't enforce our own rights. We don't have the ability to do that. So why should we be able to vote? Why would we be able to vote? We can't enforce it. Men have to enforce it for us.
When you say that, like, what do you mean by women cannot enforce their own rights? Like,
it means that as a small monolith of any size, virtually any size, there could be like some maybe extreme examples, but if you have, let's just say 10% of the men of a population who decide that they're not going to follow or obey a law, or they're going to oppress women, or they're going to do whatever the fuck they want, there's really not very much that can be done about it by anybody except men. So men are going to be the people who push force, and therefore they're the ones who are the grantor of rights, either to themselves or to women or to anybody. So you could take the same tone in slavery. You could say that men granted men rights, men fought for their right to not be slaves. All of this would be true, but women play very little in the way of a role of that because they just physically can't.
What do you mean physically can't? Like, women can pick up a gun and shoot. So what do you mean physically can't?
Yeah, but have you seen what happens in the statistics when you take female soldiers and you apply the statistical or the standard, the application standard for just regular basic training, and have women go through it? They have to give them entirely different standards because their upper body strength is so slight. Their lower body strength can't handle it. They have completely different standards, which is why to this day, I don't believe there's even been a single woman who has gotten through actual SEAL team training. Not a single one. And this is the difference between men and women. Now, you operate under physique. You know this is true. You know that you're ginormously strong in comparison to women. Just the amount of weapons that you could wield would be superior to what a woman could.
I've seen, so I don't know if the Army's done their own research. I've seen the research on Marines. The Marine Corps did a study comparing female and male, soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, women are less physically capable, so they can't carry as much equipment. I think it's like a difference of like 30 pounds or something like that of total equipment they can carry. They're also more likely to get injured, this and that. But like, again, there are like within group differences where you can find exceptionally physically fit women and exceptionally like inadequate men. So you do in these like stats see women who are outpacing some men.
If you're enjoying so far, smash that like button. Sound off with any of your thoughts down in the comment section below. Let's continue.
Like I've known dudes who are like 5'5".
There are exceptionally strong women, and there are exceptionally weak
but
men.
Like at the end of the day, the Marine Corps did determine that it is suitable, especially in cases where like certain combat roles can't be filled because we have a huge obesity problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like the amount of eligible recruits is really narrow, and especially in a situation where you're not going to have forced conscription, it's going to be very difficult to fill all the necessary combat roles.
True, but their preference would be that men filled those roles and not women.
Well, that would be the preference, but it'd also be the preference.
But why would it be the preference?
Like again,
why would it be the preference, Richard? Why?
Wait. Well, let me finish. It would also be a preference to have women fill these roles as opposed to obese men.
Yeah, that's true.
So do you think fat people shouldn't have a right
there's
to
plenty
vote
of fat women, but there's plenty of fat women too. Like, in equal numbers. So they're the only reason they're drawing
have the right to vote.
The only reason they're drawing from women is because there's not enough men. That's it. And the
Well,
other thing is that the preference here is always going to be for men. Why, Richard? Why is it always going to be for men over women when it comes to the
men
military?
on average are more physically fit.
Right.
And, like, there's
Because fighting isn't just about picking up a gun. Fighting is also about living in trenches. It's about having very little to eat. It's about being physically strong enough to endure the elements. It's about a lot more than just, oh, I picked up a gun and now I could go fight for my rights. That's not how it fucking goes.
Yeah, well, again, like, you're kind of glossing over this. There are requirements for the military. Like, you can't just be like a fat retard and end up, joining the military. There are certain physical and mental standards. And at the moment, there are so few men that meet those physical and mental requirements that we're now recruiting massive amounts of women, more than ever before, to fill combat roles.
Yeah, but there's still very few women who can meet those requirements. There's still very few women who can meet those requirements, even with all these fat men around. So it's still always going to be unequally yoked to the point of extremity, unless you can demonstrate that men or that women, even going up against unhealthy men when they're at their fittest, are going to prevail, because most of the time, even then, they're not going to. So even if a woman who's 5'5" and jacked goes up against a 6'2" fat dude, I'm still putting my money on the 6'2" fat dude, and so are you. You are too. Tell me you're not. Tell me you're not, dude. But for the most part, on average, you would, right?
Like, again, that depends. I've seen MMA fights where like a man goes up against a woman, but the woman is about the same size.
Yeah, come on, these people aren't trained in MMA, dude. These people aren't. Most people are not trained in hand-to-hand combat and years of training in MMA. That's ridiculous. The average woman who would have to fight for her rights against a monolith of men, even if they were big fat men, okay, big fatty fatzos. Women are 5'5", 5'6", 5'7". You're telling me you think that physically they're going to do better against men?
Right, but the point that you're glossing over is that there's many men who are completely inequipped or inadequate to either.
Many men, many men who are ill-equipped. These people, they don't understand, or they pretend to not understand, that just because there are exceptions to the rule doesn't mean that the rule is no longer valid. Yes, there are weak men, and yes, there are strong women. Doesn't mean that now the rule is just not valid now because there are exceptions. Every rule, every law of nature, there's exceptions to it. Doesn't mean that the law of nature or the rule is therefore not valid. I don't know why this is so hard for some people.
Military or even fight for their rights. There's
just as many women. So again, you still have the equalization. You still have the equalization.
I don't understand why you're looking at this from a group level and not, to some extent at least, at an individual level. Like, should people who are
that would be the worst way. That would be the worst way to look at it. Because an individual, no individual can enforce their rights for the most part. They can only do it on a small scale, maybe against other individuals. But it takes a collective, or at least a small group, to be able to enforce the rights for themselves and the people who are around them. Individuals themselves, they have a hard time enforcing their individual rights. In other words, it's essentially impossible to do. So if there was one woman who said, I want the right to vote, and nobody else wanted her to have the right to vote, you would agree with me immediately. She ain't getting the fucking right to vote, right? Sure. So, I mean, that's just it. But if you have, so we would have to look at this as collective. Same thing with men. If one man wants the right to vote, he ain't getting it. But if you have 100 million men who want the right to vote, they're fucking getting it.
Okay, so is this purely a descriptive claim you're making, or are you also making this a sort of a normative claim where it's almost like a might makes right? Like, because there is such an amount of power within a certain group, they should be able to either grant or taketh rights away.
Right. No. So let me explain this. Might makes right is fundamentally, from my Christian worldview, untrue. I think that might descriptively makes. I'm just not saying that it ought make right. In other words, I don't think that just because you're mighty and you enforce your will, that means you're doing a moral thing, or you're doing a righteous thing, or you're doing a good thing. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense to you?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
And going back a bit, You don't think it's either a good or bad thing that men grant women's rights? You're like neutral on it?
Well, no, I mean, I think I would have to descriptively say that because this is the hierarchical order which is put forward by our almighty creator, that it's probably a good thing. And yes, I do think that it's generally a good thing for the hierarchy to be run by men. Yeah. And it always has been, and it always will be.
So you think it's a good thing that women don't have a right to vote?
If men decide that they don't have a right to vote and they do it as a collective, I think that, yeah, I don't see a problem with that. Why would that be a problem?
Okay, well, for quite a long time, and even to this day, in some states and in probably most countries, women have absolutely no recourse if they are raped by their husbands. There's no laws granting them a protection.
Oh my God, didn't he bring this up already? Like, oh, it's so annoying because these people, like, they really have no outside, like they have their limited perspective and they can't think beyond this perspective. So this dude's issue is that he's already had it made up in his mind that if women can't vote, that is bad. No ifs, ands, or buts. If women can't vote, it is bad. Why is it bad? Well, because there is grapes within marriages, and therefore. So anything that Andrew Wilson tries to bring up that is going to make him think outside of this perspective, he can't do it. He keeps coming back to this whole, but marriage grape. But what about the marriage grape?
Against something like that, that sort of spousal abuse.
That's not true.
That is true.
No, it's not true.
That is true.
Then show me an example of where you can pin your wife down by force and rape her, and this is not something which she can go and get recourse from the law. I don't believe you.
Well, again, there's no particular law written on the books in certain states stating that a woman can be raped by their spouse. And actually, and by the way,
well, hang on. That's an affirmative right. In the United States, rights are affirmed in the negative. So in other words, to frame this the best way I can for you, you don't have a right to vote right now, Richard. Did you know that? Your right to vote is affirmed in the negative. You have no right to vote. You've never had a right to vote. What the amendment says specifically is that if a vote is had, they have to let you vote. But there's no actual right to vote. You can look it up right now. There's no actual right to vote in the United States. Your rights here are affirmed in the negative. In other words, our Constitution only spells out what the government can't do. It doesn't spell out what it must do. So it can't restrict our guns. It can't restrict our speech. It can't restrict this. It can't do this. It's not allowed to do that. It's not allowed to do this. It doesn't say what it has to do.
Let me look this up real quick.
Yeah, just put in voting negative rights. Voting is a negative right.
Only 2 states, Oregon and New Jersey, have abolished the marital exemption rule. The legal system of most countries exempt the husband from prosecution of the rape of his wife. This is from Office of Justice Programs.
So that's an affirmative right. But so what? I need you to demonstrate for me that in all 50 states of the union, that if a woman goes to the police, and just don't use the R word, say grape.
Sure.
Okay. But if she goes to the police and says, I was raped by my husband, he pinned me down and forced me into a sexual intercourse, that she has no recourse. I don't believe that.
Okay. Well, for one thing, there are many women that you can find. You can put out a call on your Twitter, or whatever social media.
It's anecdotal, and you don't believe them yourself, Richard, because I saw a video. I saw a video of you yourself make the claim that a woman had lied about getting raped.
Women can lie.
That's right. So you yourself don't believe all women. You don't believe all women, right?
No, I believe people based on the strength of evidence of their claim. But I
think that's fair.
We don't even by the way, even if you fucking don't believe that there's been a single case of a woman getting raped by their husband and having no recourse.
Not what I said.
And we can literally look at other countries who on the books, like Islamic countries.
Well, do you plan
where
on
they
invading
do
those
have an
countries?
explicit right. Sorry?
Are you planning on invading those countries?
Okay, well, the point you made is that men have dominion over women, essentially.
Yeah.
Because we're the ones who grant the rights and can taketh
Yeah.
away.
So I can say it's immoral in those nations for those men, under my Christian worldview, to grape their wives, to force their wives to have sex with them. I think that that's morally abhorrent.
why would that be morally
If you can demonstrate it,
wrong?
because it would be against my religious values. It would be against my ethical system. So I would say that that's immoral.
Well, no, it
but
wouldn't be.
I can also make the descriptive claim that unless you plan on invading those nations to stop them, then you're basically agreeing with me that men have the dominion, because there
Well-
ain't shit you can do about it, and there ain't shit they can do about it.
Well, Andrew, you wouldn't disagree with them because, again, you said men have dominion over women. If men have had the imperative to deny those rights to women, then that would be the right thing to
It's
do.
not unlimited dominion. That's not what I said. That wasn't my claim.
Well, you didn't
I
say
claimed
unlimited
that. What did I
dominion.
claim specifically? That women should not be treated poorly. They should not be treated badly. They should not be abused. None of these things should happen.
That is a
Dominion, the same
that's
way
a
that you.
consequence of not granting them those rights. Like
It's not
right
a
to vote.
consequence of that.
No, it is not. See, again, this dude, he can't think outside of his worldview. He just thinks having dominion over their wife means you could just do whatever, that you should just be able to do whatever you want to your wife or women or what have you. No, 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 no. See, the thing is that what he's saying is that men, since we have the ability to use force, then yes, we grant the rights. Andrew is not saying, though, that therefore we should treat women like crap. He's just saying that if we wanted to, we have the power to, and women can't do anything about it. But with that said, that is why it is up to us as men. This is why you get taught, like, never hit a woman. Since we carry the responsibility and the power, then we have a moral responsibility to therefore not mistreat women. And by the way, can this dude name one country where women are dominant? And, you know, you see countries where women they have to wear burqas, they have to cover up from head to toe. Name one country where men are like that, where men have to cover up, or men are just treated like second-class citizens and women are the dominant force. There is not one country, and there's never been a society like that, because it is not possible. Because as Andrew has said, whether this guy likes it or not, or whether anybody likes it or not, men are just the dominant gender, and therefore we carry all the responsibility, bad and good. Just because we are the stronger gender, yes, we grant the rights, but also we have to fight in all the war. We're the ones that have to sacrifice our lives if anything happens. If someone tried to break into our house and I am here with my family, it is my duty to defend my family against an invading force in our household. It is not up to my wife. It is not up to my kids. It is up to me. I would have to risk my life defending my family as a man. And these people right here are so indoctrinated into this worldview that they can't possibly understand or grasp the concepts that Andrew is trying to put forth. It makes perfect sense to me what Andrew is trying to say, but a lot of people are either willfully not understanding it, or they just don't understand it. This is an almost 3-hour debate. I just covered the first 30-something minutes of it or so. If you want to see the whole thing, there's a link in the description. What did you think about this debate so far, though? Sound off in the comment section below. Smash that like button if you enjoyed watching it. If you like seeing Andrew Wilson debates, I have a whole playlist for you to binge on, as well as a whole bunch of other content that I think you'll enjoy.